Well, I hope you guys had a good last night, and I hope you got breakfast. Just a couple quick announcements. Directly after this talk at 11 in the Hardware Hacking Village is HeboCon Robot Battles. You are more than welcome to last minute glue together a robot and participate. I encourage it. I will be betting as many dollars as I can on the success or failure of your robots. I think by now you guys are all aware that all the villages are open at 10. The villages are going to close a little bit early today because we have closing remarks at 5 o'clock here in this room. So go check out all the villages if you haven't already. CTF and the Intercept and any other contests that I'm forgetting all end at 4 p.m. today. So if you're participating in those, you're probably not in this room right now because you're obsessing over them. But should you be here, they end at 4 p.m. Additionally, later tonight, our after party is at Nullspace Labs. It's the local LA hackerspace up in Burbank. So I encourage you all to come. You can meet my dog. He will love each and every one of you. And we're going to have a barbecue and have a good time over there. So I encourage you to come to the after party. Making sure I'm not missing anything. All right, so up next, opening today, is Wasabi with I Feel Fine, Modern Smart Camera Security. Give him a good round of applause.
Sorry, I'm still making it all good. Good morning, everyone. So as you can see, I definitely finalized the talk title. The point of this was less about the talk and more about security and cameras. So ignore the title. But what we're going to be going through is a journey of how cameras got to what they are today, security cameras specifically, and how you can understand, research them, or protect yourself. And this is not really going to be covering everything in depth, but hopefully a starter to learn more. So about me, I am sometimes spicy. I'm a security researcher. You may have seen me on Twitter or not. I do a lot of competition volunteer work, and I do a lot of cloud stuff, so I try to tinker with anything security. That's about it. There's not much to say. I hope that this talk is informative, and I hope that everything is useful. I was a little hesitant to give this talk at first. I had the privilege of seeing Cory Doctorow. I'm sorry I butchered your name. It's 10 a.m. I'm barely awake. But he gave a talk a couple weeks ago up in the Bay, and I was really unsure about being able to speak clearly with having to wear a mask still, and he managed to do it, and it gave me a little bit of confidence. So I hope you can hear me clearly. I hope this talk is good, and as always, after the talk, I am here to answer any questions that you may have. So what is this talk about? Well, you may have heard in the news there was a certain camera company that starts with an E that an anonymous hacker known as Wasabi found some bugs on. That is not what this talk is going to be focused on. There's a lot of issues with that. I will get into it some, but the point of this is not to blame and shame because it's already happened, and if we don't fix the underlying problems with the security cameras, we are not going to improve. So the goal of this talk is to provide insight onto how we got to this point, and most of all, how we can improve situations like this. So I hope that when you are evaluating cameras, that this will give you the chance to consider ones that are a little bit better or maybe not so bad. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a safe security camera? Well, there's one. Well, actually, there's a couple. They are these types of cameras. They provide no user interaction. They publish to an FTP server, and you can view the content. So that is a secure camera. And this one, it's the San Francisco Fog Cam. The Teapot Cam ended in 2002. That was the original camera that was ever published. This one is still going after, I think, 28 years? I forget how many years it's been going, but this camera is one of the first, and it still looks like it too. But it's pretty impressive because this is secure. You're not going to have someone from the internet compromising this. If they do, I'm really impressed. It's a JPEG. So where did we come from on this? So brief history, you have D-Link who came in the early 2000s with their D-Link Securi cams. The D-Link Securi cams are very interesting because they're awful. Even when they first came out, they were absolutely dreadful. And I know I said I wouldn't be blaming companies, but there's so much media and documentation on this that I don't think I'm shaming them. They've already been shamed for like a decade now. They used ActiveX when ActiveX was dying. They switched to Java applets when Java applets were dying. And then they finally went to HTML5. All the stuff used all sorts of really insecure firmware that they just kept reusing from version to version. They finally just had to discontinue it all because it was not being maintained anymore. So that was D-Link Securi cams. A lot of people had these. A lot of people still have them. If you do a Shodan Safari on this, you will still find a lot of D-Link cameras. It's almost frightening. And then we go to the more modern version, which is FOSSCAM. And FOSSCAM, they're still around, but they were really popular 2010 to 2014, 2016 maybe. They also had some issues. This is where if you worked in any security setups, they were the ones that would be focusing, or you would hear people saying when they were focusing on setting it up, don't connect them to the internet, okay? Just its own network, just don't do that, okay? And you'd be like, well, why? What's the problem? They have some great firmware. Well, the problem is their firmware was pretty awful. It had P2P set up and all sorts of things that allowed anything when it was connected to network to connect in. And they had hidden features and things like that allowed you to get root or add users when you didn't want to. So now we have the latest iteration, which is Arlo, Eufy, Blink, I don't even know. There's so many. And these are the Wi-Fi cameras. They're all almost the same. And if a vendor doesn't have one, they have been releasing them. For example, Amcrest used to be all ONVIF cameras. And now they have jumped into the Wi-Fi camera game. And there's a major difference we'll get into later on Wi-Fi cameras. They don't function the same. In fact, in my opinion, they function worse because they take away any local user control from functioning, and even though it may be present in the firmware. Commercial cameras, on the other hand, they've not seen the massive amount of development that we've seen with consumer cameras. So on the very far left of this picture, or maybe right, I don't know how the orientation is for you guys, is the original Axis Netcam. This is the first camera, if you've ever seen like people showing webcam streams and stuff like that, this is the original one. It supported 10100 Ethernet, and it was great for the time. And then you can see in the middle, this is their modern version. It doesn't actually look that much different, except it doesn't have the side cut off. And then on the very far right, we have Unify. I didn't pick Unify for any particular reason other than it kind of looks like something very alien. It's just another camera. They support almost all the same protocols. They support almost everything. There's not a lot of development in the commercial space, probably for good reason, because all the NVR, the network video recorders, they have to use the same protocols. If you change it on a user that's a commercial user, they're going to be mad, and they have money to complain about it. If it's commercial, or I keep mixing this, sorry. If it's consumer, they're going to be just going through and you use a new app, sorry. And we've seen this actually happen where an app has been deprecated. For example, Google has 2 or 3 versions of their cameras that don't use the same app. And if they do, it's partial implementations. So the commercial space, at least, if you can get those types of cameras, they're a little more standardized. And when I was Googling photos for this, I just wanted to put this in here. This is what Google shows when you look up secure camera. The camouflage really makes it disguised, so I just thought that was funny. It has no relevance. Okay, back to the Securi Cam for a second. The D-Link Securi Cam was particularly interesting because it had a lot of situations that did not have to happen. And when we look back, we're like, wow, all of these, how could they implement these? Keep in mind, this is 2004. A lot of these vulnerabilities we knew about, but they were not talked about as much in embedded systems. Embedded systems were much more black box. So We've learned a lot thanks to D-Link, but I don't know that this was, it had to happen. So from the CVEs, I have a whole bunch of links that talk about these. From the CVEs, multiple deficient coding practices led to vulnerabilities. They could have been avoided by just doing code reviews. There were hidden features in the firmware, including an ASCII viewer for your stream. So if you didn't want to look at the JPEG, you could look at ASCII streams of your content, which was a very weird thing to put in a very limited firmware space. More CVEs than you can count because they never updated the main OS. It was Linux, but they didn't update it. Unauthenticated streams everywhere because you have to be able to view the stream in the web interface. ActiveX and IE6 were the primary use case, and that gives you an idea when these were first developed, and then they just kept rolling the firmware through. And here's the view of the more modern version of this firmware. It's a little disappointing. You can see it has some menus and stuff like that, but it doesn't really give you a lot of control, and it's primarily meant for someone to actually physically log in to the stream to provide the way you manage it. With most apps-based, you go into the app now, or if you have a commercial camera, you're going into the NVR to configure them. That was not the case with the D-Link. Whoa, hello, someone's adjusting the audio. Echo. Okay, I'll just keep talking. Okay, sorry if I was too loud, I guess. So FOSCAM, they had quite a bit of variety, and I actually like FOSCAM, but they suffered from some problems that everyone else seems to suffer from. Insecure credentials, they had fixed root passwords on their firmware. Insecure authentication, so they had authentication bypass in a couple of areas, and a couple of other issues with authentication. Again, unauthenticated streams, because apparently the only way to stream is to provide a unauthenticated stream to view through the web browser. I don't know why. They also had cross-site scripting, and they had a telnet enabler in the web firmware. So you could just run a command and enable telnet and get in. So a lot of features for the value. But at the end of the day, if we're going to be picky, if this was running on an isolated network where nobody could get in and the NVR was the edge, you wouldn't have this as a major issue. And so that was okay in a lot of situations. It wasn't great, but as long as you knew about it, you could protect against it. Now we're getting to the cloud era, right? And we have Wyze. How many people here have Wyze cameras? I'm sure a lot of people. Only one person's willing to admit. Oh, two. Okay. So Wyze camera, I have Wyze cameras. They run the special firmware that does RTSP. They are essentially running in an isolated network because I don't trust them, but they're great little cameras for the price. If you connect them to the cloud, on the other hand, what happens is insecure access. They had a vulnerability that was disclosed by, I'm forgetting who disclosed the vulnerability, but Wyze did not patch the vulnerability for 3 years, and they did not announce it to users of their cameras for 3 years. What that means is this vulnerability was accessible, known, and likely used by attackers. If someone is a researcher and they're finding it, you can guarantee someone else has found it that's using it for malicious purposes. And so their solution was not patch the firmware, they just removed the product from being sold. So users of this camera still have the same vulnerabilities, as far as I know. And then as a benefit for users, they enabled RTSP streaming as a beta feature for their Wisecam V3s. That was a really cool feature and a great opportunity, which, as you can see in the corner, they made an announcement last year right after this news story broke, saying, we evaluated this, it was always considered a beta feature, but RTSP is no longer going to be in our firmwares, and we've removed the ability for you to download the firmware that allowed it. So there's like an underground sharing network of people who have kept the firmware alive and modded it and added updates. It's pretty impressive. But they created something that was actually pretty good and would allow users to run things locally and securely, and they removed it. So now you're forced to go through the cloud solution, which we know has problems. And I guess I shouldn't be too picky on cloud because there's always more. If someone can connect something to the internet, they can connect it publicly to the internet, because why wouldn't you want to browse your camera from anywhere you are? And so on the well, on the right side is the Google result. I just did IP camera vulnerabilities. There was there were hundreds of thousands of results for CVEs for IP cameras. None in particular, but there's tons. And on the left is all the public IP cameras through Shodan. And they had thousands. This specific search was a keyword for a vulnerable version of a firmware of a specific IP camera. I'm not going to share it because then I don't want people being like, oh yeah, look at all these results. You can find it if you want. I'm not going to enable you on that. But 3,000 results in Germany alone, 2,000 in the United States. There's thousands of cameras that are vulnerable to actual remote control, and they're public on the internet. So even if, let's say that this vulnerability didn't exist, we're talking cameras that are publicly accessible. If they have default creds, which a lot of people do, now all of a sudden we have an entire security issue because you can just log in. And so all these cameras have default creds and Shodan can index them. So you see some cars, you see some houses, some farms. The real interesting ones are sometimes like, you'll see some like factories and factory workers and some scary stuff. I remember way back when Google was much newer, Googling like IP cameras and actually stumbling upon actual IP cameras. Because I was like, oh man, I want to do security. And I remember stumbling into IP cameras not knowing that it was an IP camera and not a Google result. So you end up looking at these things where it's like a factory and stuff. And that's part of what got me into security was like, well, I don't know anything about this, but this seems bad. And so it's unfortunate that today we still have that same issue of public accessible cameras, but it's there. But you may be asking, why does this keep happening? Why do we have cloud issues? Why do we have open cameras? Why do we have default credentials? It's a good question. You know, we see here on this one, this was in doing this talk, I started getting a whole bunch of ads on every single social media platform for cameras. Some cooler than others, some worse. There's one where it says that you can see someone's skeleton. It was pretty cool. I don't believe it. But the cameras, there's a new vendor popping up every week, basically. And why is that? Well, I did a research. I did a site survey of Google, because that's how you do it. What vendors could I find? I found over 120 vendors of security cameras that are known, not just like startups or ones that are just showing up on Amazon under a different brand name. 120 actual vendors that are known. And surely 120 vendors have their own chips, right? No. There are 10 vendors of chipsets for cameras, or thereabouts. Some of these are used by dash cams. Some of these are used by other systems. At the end of the day, that's not a lot. 120 down to 10 is not a good ratio. But what are these vendors for chipsets? Well, it's expensive to build a SoC, system on a chip. It's really hard to develop that whole circuit board and not have massive losses to cost. Because every design revision is a new board print. Those are expensive. There's a lot of work to go on. It's difficult. So you'd go with a reference design that makes you do the minimum number of changes to ensure that you have functionality. And it's harder to build these because camera optics aren't cheap. They're actually very complicated, and most people use some off-the-shelf, most vendors, I should say. There are a few exceptions. Axis Cameras, remember I mentioned them as the commercial vendor. For some reason, they develop their own system on a chips. I'm not opposed to that. I think that's actually pretty impressive. One, it means that they have more probability of increasing the revisions and keeping their stuff up to date. They tailor design their stuff so they're not putting all this extra stuff. And they also design it with their own reference implementation, which is hopefully more secure. So all that's pretty positive. But software development, it takes time. So you get this reference implementation. It comes with reference software. And now you have to load up all your software on it and make it compatible. And so they give you a tool chain. They give you some software that will let you build it. And that's it. What about the latest kernel? You know, it says mainline. Well, mainline as of when they released it, they're not updating it again because all these require hundreds of patches to the Linux kernel, to the operating system, to fit in that little tiny chip that seems so powerful at first. So you have a vendor SDK and a vendor kernel, and you use that. And if the vendor updates it, you have to update all your code again. So don't change it. And that's where we run into a lot of these issues. That's why things like D-Link probably happened, because the vendor SDK kept going and they were like, okay, well, this one works. We don't want to change it. And then also the other thing that a lot of people do with cameras is they don't make their own optics. Sony is pretty much by far the camera optics system. And it's pretty interesting because Sony's also used for dash cams, security cameras, like actual like picture taking cameras. They're everywhere. Their optics and sensors are just used universally. I don't think they're vulnerable, but you know, what do I know? And then you get into this other world where a vendor will create their own chip. This is Wyze on the left, and in the middle is Raku. Do you see the similarity? I do. And so you'll get vendors re-releasing their own products to provide a new version for another vendor, and that vendor wants to release their own software. So now you're like 2 down the chain from the original SDK, the software development kit. And so now it's even harder to update it because you don't necessarily have all the resources you had at the beginning. And then down on the bottom is the, this is a, I believe it's a rock chip reference board, just to give you an idea. You'll have like a PCIe, you'll have the camera connectors and the chips and the memory. And this is how people build reference boards. They'll be like, okay, well, this is all the I/O we need, and this is how they do the wiring diagram, so we can copy that and put it into our product. Because there's also things with memory. You have to worry about how much the runs go, how the power is connected, all sorts of things like that. But you probably get where I'm coming from this. So we have these tools, and all these tool chains, and we're making a reference board, and we don't want to change too much, so what happens? Well, we have a lot of similarities. So on the far left is, okay, yeah, sorry, it's inverted for me. On the far left is the Wyze cam. You can't see it here, but it is the same chipset that is used in the UFI cameras. Same exact one. You'll see that over in the rectangle on the top, that's a wireless chip. And you can see on the Wyze cam, the green chip is just an off-the-shelf wireless chip. So what vendors do is they're taking the off-the-shelf stuff they can buy for cheap and just interfacing with them. So they're adding, and stacking things. Here's a different Wyze cam and then another UFI product, and you can see that's a high silicon chipset. That's one of the vendors that's used a lot. And then here's a blink cam and another vendor. I'm blanking, it starts with an O. And then yet another T chipset for another security camera. And so you get the idea. There's not a lot of variety. And I am not rich. I do not have every single one of these products. What I do instead is when you're doing research on these types of things, the FCC, as part of wireless certification, has to publish internal specs and internal pictures of all devices that go through FCC certification. So all I did was I went to there. After the NDA expires, they have to publish it publicly. So I just downloaded those. I took a look, and this saves me a lot of money doing my initial research to see what do I want to evaluate. And it's a really great tool to find out how a chip is designed without destroying yours first. So this is UFI, the Homebase 3. I thought this was a particularly interesting design because they've actually boxed, I believe just for RF interference purposes, but they've actually boxed almost the exact reference implementation for each of these chips. So there's the eMMC in the middle, which is obviously the flash. On the left is the Wi-Fi. On the right is a sub-gigahertz transmitter and receiver, well, transceiver. There's an unpopulated chip that says Bluetooth that they guess never added. And then on the bottom is the rock chip. And that is the system on a chip. And it's quad-core. It's basically a little Linux computer all in one. The problem with these chips is they don't get newer kernels. Okay. So I guess I kind of talked about it already, but here's the summary of what's all in common and different. So the way they're designed, they almost all have a dedicated board for the camera optics and sensors, have their dedicated power controller that controls how things are regulated into the standard, 3, 5 volt. They have sometimes sub-gigahertz because that works great for low-powered devices. They have a dedicated Wi-Fi chip usually, and they also have a dedicated sock. The differentiators. Well, Wyze and Eufy use the same chip, right? I mean, a few versions different, but they're essentially the same chip. Shouldn't it be the same software? No, because the differentiators. Wyze uses no battery for the most part. They use a powered USB cable to power it full time. So that gives them a little more opportunity to do like actual like NVR stuff on the camera, where you can see streams and look at the data all at once. Eufy, on the other hand, even though it's again the same chip, they have only stream segments because it's battery or solar powered and you can't actually collect all the information. So, and then obviously the cloud interactions are very different, and that's the software that's put on top. So, and I just wanted to go through this quickly. The rocket ship that we were talking about before, on the left is some open source guy who says, I don't know what this means, but it seemed pretty bad. It says, domestic users better prepare a ladder before trying to compile. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't seem easy. And then on the right, it says Android. This sock now goes to Android 11 and the 4.19 kernel, leaving the 3x kernel behind. Now, keep in mind, this is a modern sock, and we're on Linux, what, 5 something? Almost 6? So, as we can see, most vendors have issues. Some have more issues than others. But the problem is cloud is insecure, and you can't trust once your data is sent out that it will be used in a trustworthy way. For example, Ring, these are 2 different articles. I guess they didn't learn the first time. They send your footage automatically to law enforcement, whether you want it or not. They also send or allow access by hackers into your footage, whether you want to or not. And that's because everything is controlled through the cloud. You have a portal. If the portal's not secure, then you have issues. So on paper, Eufy seemed like the best opportunity. And the bring up Ring, not because they didn't fix it. They did. They did a good job. I bring it up because when you're shopping for cameras, you're like, well, do I want something all in the cloud or do I want something that I can secure? The good news is, on paper, Eufy seemed great. Local storage only, controlled with a home base, not the cloud. Had many different cameras it supported. 2K and 4K footage. Seemed really good. Well, unfortunately, we know what happened. They didn't really live up to that hype. And really, I don't fault Eufy for any of this, but where things went wrong was instead of trying to fix the problems, they started blaming the users and threatening users. And I was not alone in this. In my research, I found out that users had been reporting these issues for quite a few times over the last 3 years. And while I'm a security researcher, and users were like, why is this happening? I don't know what's going on. And Eufy's like, no, that's expected. And we'll get into that in a few times. But anyway, last November, this is how it all started. I saw Paul Moore on Twitter. I didn't even follow him at the time. I just happened to see Eufy. And I was like, huh, I'm a Eufy user. I wonder what's going on. And I was coming in not as a security researcher, but as a user, because I was like, uh-oh, I have Eufy. What is going to happen here? So I was like, okay, well, this isn't good. Actually, this is the second tweet where I found out that you could VLC stream the footage. But anyway, I saw the original tweet, and I'm like, I guess I'll start investigating. And a long lost art of security research, or just any tinkering, is going into the inspect button on a web page. Some people call that hacking. I mean, all the content's already provided to you, though. Like, in a web browser, all that data's there. You're not really hacking the data that's already in your browser. So, really don't know how I feel about that. But I went into the browser, and there was a lot of information. There was not only was every serial number of every device that I owned from Eufy in there, it had all the battery metrics, had battery metrics of how long it was until the battery expired, which I didn't know there was an expiration date, but apparently there is according to Eufy. And it had all the unique IDs, wake keys, all sorts of metadata information just sitting right there. For a security researcher, that's a treasure chest. Like, just give me all the information. Yeah, please, let me see how I can use this. And the other interesting thing was there was a lot of base 64 encoded strings. And I know everyone loves base 64 encoded strings because that's super good encryption. And I was like, huh, I wonder what those say. Well, we'll get to that. Oh, look, the slide's reversed. There we go. I was trying to pull a pun and I didn't. But anyway, here's the original tweet. He was talking about using that he was finding feed footage and unique identifiers from face identifiers in S3 buckets. Sounds pretty bad. So that's where I started. Here's a timeline of the issues. In 2021, Eufy made the news because there were people getting random people's footage. Eufy users were finding out that they had other people's streams. Like one guy went to go see his front door and he was looking at like a baby monitor. Like, does not add up. So they reported it and Eufy's like, no, that's not an issue. And then they quietly shut down everything and restarted and fixed it. And then in June last year, the Eufy home base suffered from quite a bit of CVEs and RCEs that they sort of fixed. And then it also was demonstrated that they have S3 buckets that leak information if you poke at it. So that was pretty bad. You'd think that the S3 bucket issue in June would have been an indicator. But then in November, Paul Moore was like, wait, I see this again. There's more bucket stuff. Now, in Eufy's defense, they did proper signing on the S3 bucket data, but there was an endpoint that allowed you to sign for the S3 tokens. You could technically pull the information out. And but that's not all of it, so that was something. Shortly after he posted, a group called SEC Consultants, I don't know who they are, but they seem pretty cool. They published their multi-year research, which had a whole bunch of stuff. They dumped the firmware, they dumped all the metadata, and all sorts of issues that they found. They had static keys, bad Wi-Fi keys, bad root users. So all the stuff that we talked about, Eufy had in their firmware, the only reason you weren't detecting it is because the camera shuts down after 10 seconds. You know, it's not actually secure, it's just hard to access. In December, Eufy published and said, no, none of this is possible, you guys are liars. In February this year, they said, sorry, it's actually true, we're gonna fix this. And then specifically they said we're going to disable users from opening the debug interface in a web browser. Spoiler, they didn't. But when I was doing my research for this initially and for this talk, the users know about this. There's users that are actually publishing their own API clients to interface with Eufy, get the streams, get the content, get all sorts of things. They have done deep dives in the firmware. Honestly, these guys are more impressive than most of the security research that I've done. Like they're just been like, yeah, here's the whole API, here's all that, here's what those mean. I've decoded this and I found out how that interfaces. Here's how to wake a camera remotely. Guys, this is awesome. So don't underestimate end users who are technical. They're really impressive. But in that research, some users were posting on open source GitHub that they were finding all these S3 buckets and they weren't sure what to do with them. One of them was this, I cannot pronounce it, but it's in the picture here. They published it and they're like, it's sending face data to this different company name in S3. Turns out that was the old name for Eufy. So they're still sending S3 face data. And then there was another S3 bucket, I call it repo because it didn't contain just raw web data. It actually contained CI/CD data from Eufy. And another user was like, hey, what's this? It seems weird, but there's a lot of cool data here. Here's some firmware dumps. We can analyze the protocol. Here's some metadata on how they do their stuff. Here's some scripts. We can really use this to make our open source stuff better. I can't share that, though, because the last time I checked, and I'm trying not to go there, because when I saw it and I realized it was all like CI data, I was like, I don't want to touch this anymore. But the last time I checked, it was still public. And users reported it to Eufy saying, should this be public? So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. But anyway, where this all began, the web portal. This is the web portal. It seems very old because that's one of their original cameras. It didn't seem well maintained, and it seems like they just bootstrapped stuff on top of other features. Like some of it still references trying to get the latest version of Flash Player. So if that gives you an idea of when this was made originally. So I'm blurring out stuff, but you can see here's a random camera. a car. There's the wake-up key or something that looks like it, the URL for the footage, and then you can see like all of the different metadata information that Eufy sends. I don't remember where this camera was. I don't know if this was a different camera or I don't remember where this camera was, but the point is the data was visible. So why was the data visible? Well, there's two protocols that are used for streaming content. One is RTMP and one is RTSP. They're both old. RTSP was made by Real Media, Real Player. RTMP was made by Adobe, well, Macromedia and then Adobe. RTMP is designed to store content and share it. So like if you have a video file, it's designed to stream the video file. RTSP is designed to stream a stream and allow you to play, pause, resume, and adjust the stream. So they're both very similar, but RTMP is what Eufy used because in theory what they're doing is they're taking the content from your home base and saying, I want to remotely relay this down. So at some point there does have to be a relay because it's RTMP. That makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is the RTMP was just encoded by the serial number, which is on the box, of the home base. So when you, and a lot of people were saying, no, you can't possibly, there were 4 bytes of encoding on the URLs, and I'll show you that in a second. But there were 4 bytes of randomness. And the way their implementation worked is if you found a valid stream, it would return a result. If it didn't find a valid stream, it would instantly return an error. So as we've seen in other security stuff, you can brute force this pretty quickly. If it takes less than a second, 4 bytes of randomness are not nearly enough to go through. I can just loop through, find a serial number that I want to target, and just loop through. That's a major problem. And so I reported it. Hey, Eufy, this doesn't seem right. Also, this would have been the video, but unfortunately the video decided to glitch out, so I removed it. So if we have time at the end, I'll show it. But yeah, so here's the Eufy Life stuff. So the timestamp just has to be a recent timestamp. They just validate that it's new. So we got a Unix timestamp, check. We got a token. They don't validate the token. I was putting like dead beef as the token, and it was accepting it. And then the stream. The stream's where it gets interesting, and I've color-coded it. They have camera ID to the home base, and then the home base serial number, and then a random token. And you can see originally it was 4 bytes. Now it's 16. I don't know of a realistic way to go through an entire 16-byte space in a realistic amount of time. So good job, Eufy, at least doing that. But you can see how simple this was to decode. And then you would get this stream, and that would convert it to an RTMP stream, which you could view in VLC. And so, of course, Eufy said, hey, guys, we've fixed it, right? We've disabled the ability for a user to debug. As you can see, they put this thing that I found on Stack Overflow. Literally, I Googled what they did, and it was on Stack Overflow. How do I stop users from messing with Web Inspector? So they copied and pasted from Stack Overflow. The good news is in that same Stack Overflow, they also give instructions how to disable it in case you want to work through the debugger still. So is it actually fixed? No, because you just check deactivate breakpoints, and you can use whatever you want. So that was interesting. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room. This is a bug that Eufy has known about. People have posted about it for literally years. If you take any Eufy device and you're a thief or someone, all you have to do, you don't even have to rush to break into someone's home. All you have to do is bring a ladder, press the reset button on the thing for 3 seconds, and all the footage showing you that you were there is gone. So once you've reset it, they have to repair it, and the footage may or may not be there after the fact. So pretty rough. And Eufy, this was over 2 years ago. They still haven't fixed it. People have written to them, and they say, this is okay, this is the way it's supposed to work. I don't remember what this was. Oh yeah, this is all the data. They tried to obfuscate the data by just making letters like A through Z and putting all the data in there. That's not a deterrent, because a modern web inspector, a modern web browser, is going to properly parse everything here and show you the entire path without going into debug mode and setting breakpoints. Breakpoints are just a help. They're not a necessary item. Whoop. How can camera companies improve? Be honest with be honest with customers. Try to embrace open protocols. We have standards for a reason. Provide security research as a way to directly contact you. I can't tell you how hard it was to get a hold of anyone at UFI that wasn't just a tier 1 tech support person. If I'm reporting a bug, even if it's not necessarily one you agree with, a tier 1 tech support person is not necessarily qualified to make that decision. But that is the current state with UFI. A tier 1 tech support person says, okay, it's not an issue. If you want to report a bug, you have to send it to support. You can't support it to like security@ufi.com. It has to go to support. And I've been blown off more times by UFI trying to report bugs than I've actually gotten a hold of someone at UFI to try to replace them. Provide ways to safely give feedback and don't threaten security researchers, or just don't threaten anybody at all. Like if someone's reporting a bug, you shouldn't say, I'm going to sue you. That doesn't help fix the problem. That just makes it go underground, which causes more issues. And then finally, UFI is definitely not an American company. They have typos in their apps. They have spelling issues. It's clear that they're based out of China. That's okay. That's great. If there is a security issue, though, you need someone who's fluent in English and Chinese, whatever specific dialect you want to pick. I don't care, but you need someone that can translate. There is at present nobody that can, at UFI that I am aware of, that can properly translate a security risk from support to an engineer. Because every single layer you go to, I'm familiar with international companies. Like you have a lot of people who speak different languages. You work with them, but you're trying to always keep the number of people you have to go to translate your item at a minimum. If you don't do that, what ends up happening is it's a game of telephone. So if I said, the camera is vulnerable to a security issue, the camera is vulnerable, the camera. And unfortunately, for better or worse, this is what's happening at UFI. So the problem is it took quite some time to get the actual risk relayed to an actual engineer. And then they finally start fixing it. And I don't think they actually understood the problems because the fixes they did are not complete. If they understood, or if they reached out to any of us and replied as security researchers, they probably would have realized the risk is minimal. Here's how to fix it. It would take 5 minutes. They didn't have to implement all these security changes to block debugger or anything like that. And I think someone finally figured out because they did add enough randomness, and they're going to actual encrypted end-to-end protocols instead of using RTMP. So on the whole, I think someone finally understood, but it took all the way to February for them to even acknowledge that. And so my advice for companies is go directly to the users if they're reporting a security vulnerability. I know it takes time, but you're more likely to address a problem quickly and quietly and have a positive experience. Like, look, we had a researcher. They reported the bug, and now we fixed it in a week or a month. I don't know. But at the end of the day, if that is the end user going to them and stuff, the news is going to be able to say, oh, look at how proactive UFI is. But instead, they delayed, denied, and it made them look pretty bad. So my advice to you, UFI, is just trust your security people. Let them be a more part of this process so that bugs can be reported when they're found. And then for end users, the conclusion is this. Don't trust in companies because they're not providing you always accurate information. Not necessarily intentionally, but they just may not know. Don't put cameras in your home. Just don't. Like, if you're going to, put it facing the doorway. Or if you are going to put a camera in your home, make sure it's an isolated network, an NVR, a network video recorder, that doesn't connect out to the internet. If you are going to use a public camera, presume that all the content is public. Would you open your doors and windows and just leave your house open like that every day? That's what you're doing with a camera. On the outside, okay, well, that's different. You know, it is public. Someone may be just staring outside. It would be really weird, but someone may be just staring outside and there's nothing you can do. That's what a camera's doing. Treat it like a person because that's what it is. Are you comfortable with someone just staring at you inside your home? Well, That's how you should view this. And I know it's a really weird analogy, but at least it gets the point across that you have to think differently, that these are not tools to protect you, they're tools watching you. And if you're going to use an NVR, use an open source one. I love Frigate. Frigate is really awesome. It has like AI things, and it's really cool. If you can even obtain a Google Coral. But Frigate's really cool. So all in all these things combined give you a fairly secure network, and you don't have to rely on the cloud, because you can connect when you want and things like that. I know that's not for everyone, but until we get to a place where camera companies can provide accurate information to us, we are stuck in this situation. So it's going to be a process, but as long as you protect yourselves with this basic set of information, you should be good. And then go from there. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to try to pull up the video that I originally shared. We'll see how that goes, and see if that actually works. So that should be exciting. See? Highly technical. Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, so the files are on the other screen. Well, how am I going to do this? Hold on a second. It's a very short video, so we won't go over time. But start thinking of your questions, though. Okay. Let's see if that worked. Well, cool, I broke it. Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, we did it. Teamwork. I can't see my mouse, though. Wow, this is just... See, this is why you do the demos at the end. Oh, there's my mouse. Okay. All right, we'll start at the beginning. So I've had to blur out a lot because I don't want people to log into my cameras. When this is happening, this is still vulnerable. You can see I'm just going into the debugger, and I'm looking at all the flow data of all the information that in JSON that's coming back to me. So I just copy the URL out. And I don't know if this is the one where I demoed it to the reporter, but the reporter was like, how do I know, how do I know that this is usable? And I was like, we can test this. So not thinking, I sent the reporter the URL, the permanent URL, to one of my cameras. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I just gave a reporter access basically infinitely to my camera. That doesn't seem good. But that's the problem is, we were able to demonstrate that from different computers in different states, we were still able to see the same stream. And you can see here the footage, and it's actually ticking, so you know it's not a frozen frame that I'm trying to fake it. And that was what happened, is you can actually just pull the URLs. So yes, as some people were talking about, you did need the URL once, or you could generate it as long as you knew the serial number, and you just have to try the randomness. This was a helper because if you could log in and demonstrate it, you don't have to randomly generate it. But that doesn't stop me from making a tool to do that. I didn't want to. All I wanted was Eufy to fix this problem so that my stream content wasn't viewable by some random person. So that was where that all started. But hopefully that gives you some context to this stuff. I talked a lot. Hopefully pretty cool. But at this point, it is the end. Does anyone have any questions? Are we all? Okay. So I will repeat the question. For friends and family, what are the best practices that we can give them that aren't probably too overwhelming? I'm paraphrasing, but what are the best practices for people who are non-technical? I think the middle point that I said, don't put cameras in your home. If you're going to use an app, and a lot of people have to because they're not technical enough to do a full network video recorder system, don't put the cameras in your home. If you're going to put cameras in your home, or you're going to put cameras and you want to do a full thing, there are companies that do home security camera installation. They'll run the Cat 5 or Cat 6 or Cat 8. They'll run it through the house. They'll set up your network so that there's PoE to power the camera, set up a backup system. That's expensive, though. So the cheap way and the easiest advice for people who are non-technical to follow is don't put the camera in your home. That's it. So hopefully that helps. Yeah. So the question was, what about people who are elderly? How do we help them? This is, I want to get the slide up, but I don't want subtitles. How do we help people who are elderly? Well, this is a complicated answer. I don't have a good one. Usually when you're dealing with elderly people, you want a camera inside, because if they fall, you don't know if they're hurt. And so, but this also is an invasion of privacy potentially, because they may or may not agree to this. So it's a very complicated thing. But what I will say is hire someone to do a professional NVR installation for you if you have to do that. Assuming your elderly family member agrees to it, that would be the best way. But yeah, it's a complicated process. Anyone who has elderly has probably dealt with this. But yeah, don't use just random cameras you can find, because as you're saying, that's the same privacy issue I'm talking about. If someone installs this camera, someone else could be watching your elderly family member, and that's not good at all. So it's like 1 minute left. So
As someone who's come from the space of doing old zone miner installations, I mean, I'm excited about Frigate because I was just looking it up. But I think for a lot of people, the excitement about something cloud solutions is not having NVR. So I guess what I was asking is, do you think is there anyone operating in the space of NVR as like a service that is actually doing security properly? Or is it just like either you buy the like insecure IoT IP cameras, or you have an Axis NVR installation company?
it's interesting. Amcrest is a company that I've been keeping an eye on. I think they're actually just rebranded Foscam. I can't prove that though. But Amcrest has come out with several NVR systems that actually seem pretty decent. They allow you to use a VPN to connect in, and if you're setting up an NVR, you're probably somewhat technical to begin with. So that was pretty interesting. And the cameras are IP. It has built-in PoE, and it's a pretty easy to use system for someone who may be a little more technical, but not all the way there. And also, for the record, I love ZoneMinder. It's still a great tool, but you know it's a challenge sometimes because you have to balance that. But yeah, check out Amcrest. I don't know how secure it is, but I mean to at some point. Anyway, it is I think at time. So thank you guys. If you have any questions, I will be in the back.